Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei fell in love with Gabriel part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. The biblical god, leader of the famous angel faction, father to all angels and seraphs, was currently lying in a pool of his own blood. The four devil kings, Lucifer, Leviathan, Asmodeus and Beelzebub. These four had managed to break through the defenses of heaven and had gotten far enough to reach God. However, God had fought and defeated all four of them, but he surely did not come out unscathed. The wounds they inflicted on the Holy Father were certainly fatal and would soon end his life. But he had enough strength to form a smile as the doors to his throne room burst open. "Father, what have they done to you?" exclaimed Michael, horrified at the sight upon him. Gabriel, Michael's sister, began crying and clutched his arm tightly as the sight of their father dying was too much for her. She looked away as she held her brother tightly. Michael frowned and hugged his sister, comforting her. God struggled to raise his head to look at his son and daughter. But Michael saw this and immediately helped his father raise his head. Michael held the back of God's head and checked his wounds. There were many cuts and bruises visible, but that wasn't the most troubling of God's wounds, for there was a gaping hole on his stomach. "It's alright," Michael spoke God softly, his voice was not as powerful as it once used to be. Michael held his father's hand and nodded, deciding to stay strong in his father's final moments. "Come closer, I must tell you something before I leave this realm." God told Michael urgently. The seraph nodded and moved closer to his father. God whispered a few words to his son. Although Gabriel could not tell what her father was telling Michael, she would ask her brother at a later time. "Can you do that for me, Michael?" asked God with a small smile. Michael smiled and tears began flowing out of his eyes. "Absolutely," reassured Michael. God's smile grew wider at this, and his eyes began to slowly shut close. Gabriel's crying only increased in volume as she witnessed her father accept his doomed fate. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her muffled cries echoed around the throne room. Michael grit his teeth and he held his father's hand tighter. A few moments passed before God's eyes were fully closed and his heart ceased to beat. Michael's bangs were covering his eyes, while Gabriel fell on her knees crying her heart out. Michael slowly put his father back down, but he refused to let go of his hand. "Father TCH." Michael grit his teeth as he held his father's hand with both of his, and his tears dropped to the reflective white floor. Footsteps could soon be heard from outside the throne room, and the rest of the seraphs could be seen approaching the throne room. Uriel, Raphael, Metatron and the other seraphs eventually arrived at the throne room. Many shocked gasps escaped their mouths, and a few of them had fallen to their knees in shock and sorrow. Raphael bit his lower lip and approached his father's corpse. The blonde seraph kneeled down right beside his father and began praying silently. Uriel had not broken down like the others, but his clenched fists were proof of his anger. Michael eventually let go of his father's hand after a few minutes, while the other seraphs had already left the throne room to grieve and prevent the rest of the angels from finding out about God's death, as the revelation of such knowledge would cause too much chaos. The only ones left in the room were Michael, Gabriel, Uriel and Raphael, the four great seraphs. "Brothers and sisters, we must hasten forth to the sacred chambers," urged Michael. Gabriel looked to her brother donning a confused expression. "Are we not forbidden to enter those chambers without our father's approval?" inquired Gabriel, tilting her head slightly. "She is right, you would dare defy our father after his passing?" inquired Uriel, his voice threatening. Raphael sighed at his brother's daring attitude, but decided to keep quiet. "Of course not, father passed on to me a special task before he passed away," Michael told the others, remembering what his father had whispered to him earlier. "FLASHBACK. Come closer, I must tell you something before I leave this realm," God told Michael urgently. The seraph nodded and moved closer to his father. "Once I pass away, gather the four great seraphs and lead them to the sacred chambers," God told Michael. His eyes quivered slightly at the sudden task. "Within those chambers you will find the one who will succeed me, the one who will lead the angels into the bright future," informed God. Michael was intrigued by his father's words. Who could possibly succeed his father, the seraph thought with a hint of curiosity. "Find him, teach him our ways, train him to become a powerful leader. And in due time, he will bring all of you the happiness you deserve, so take good care of him, okay?" requested God as a smile began to form on his face. "Can you do that for me, Michael?" asked God with a small smile. Michael smiled and tears began flowing out of his eyes. "Absolutely," reassured Michael. God's smile grew wider at this, and his eyes began to slowly shut close. Flashback END. "Sounds a bit exaggerated," huffed Uriel, crossing his arms in doubt. A small frown formed on Michael's face at the distrust his brother showed him. "But if our father truly told you this, then let us make haste." Michael smiled as his brother said this. "Follow me." Uriel and Gabriel were the first to follow, while Raphael took one last glance at his father, who was slowly dissipating in golden holy particles before following suit. He had been wondering what happened to the four devil kings. They must have dematerialized before they arrived. The four great seraphs headed towards the sacred chambers, which were usually locked with incredibly powerful magical chains and locks. To the surprise of the seraphs though, the locks were unlocked now. "They're unlocked," remarked Raphael with surprise. Uriel stepped forward and picked up one of the chains which had been unlocked and had been lying on the floor. "Father must have set up some sort of death switch," mused Uriel, inspecting the chains. "Death switch?" Gabriel repeated in confusion. "Uriel is saying that father set up a system in which it automatically unlocks the chains to the sacred chambers immediately upon his death," explained Michael, Gabriel humming in interest after hearing her brother's explanation. "Anyway, I believe it's time to find out what father was hiding behind these locks." Uriel nodded and pulled open the heavy door to the chamber. Michael was the first to enter the chambers, Gabriel followed shortly after. Inside were four candles lit up on both sides. The recurring white and gold architecture from the outside of the chambers still remained within the chambers. However, what surprised Michael was the appearance of another door blocking the path. The sealed door had a barrier protecting it which would have prevented entry from devils, fallen angels and anything that wasn't an angel. Uriel and Raphael had soon walked in and were baffled at the sight of another seal. "Is this a joke?" groaned Uriel, smacking his face onto his palm in annoyance. "Don't complain yet. Look." Michael pointed towards what appeared to be four locks keeping the door sealed. The locks appeared to be connected to tablets which required specific palm scans for each one. "One for each great seraph," concluded Raphael. Uriel abruptly turned to him in a surprised manner. "So father made sure that only we four could ever enter these chambers. God never ceases to amaze," remarked Michael with a bright smile as he placed his palm within the tablet, which perfectly fit the structure of his palm. Gabriel mimicked her brother and placed her hand on the tablet which resembled her palm. Uriel and Raphael eventually did the same. The loud trumpet-like sound echoed throughout the entirety of heaven as the door opened for the four great seraphs. After the door had fully opened, Michael and the other three seraphs found a golden crib in between a few more lit candles and a chandelier on the ceiling. Michael, Uriel and Raphael were baffled. The crib looked like it belonged to a child. Surely the one who would supposedly surpass God was not still a child, was what the three male seraphs were thinking. However, Gabriel was merely stunned for a moment before racing over to the crib in excitement. The female seraph soon squealed in excitement as she soon saw the one within the crib. Michael gulped and slowly walked over to her sister, who was picking up something from the crib. Gabriel had grabbed the entity within the crib and turned around to her brothers. Michael's eyes widened in shock at what she was holding. Raphael laughed awkwardly, and Uriel stepped back unconsciously. "Iyah!" A loud cry echoed throughout the chambers. Gabriel shushed the source of the crying by swaying her body softly, humming softly to the one she held to her chest. "The one that would surpass God is a mere child." A child indeed, the one within the crib was a small, fragile but beautiful child. Michael eventually recovered from his shock and laughed happily as he approached his sister and took a closer look at the child. The youngling possessed pale blonde hair, innocent golden eyes and a smile that could melt the hearts of the seraphs. Gabriel was blushing at the cuteness of the young boy and snuggled him close to her chest. Michael leaned closer to the child. The youngling looked at Michael in a clueless manner before laughing happily and clapping his hands cutely. Gabriel giggled at the display in front of her while Michael laughed softly. Raphael approached the child and poked his nose. The youngling sneezed softly before laughing out loud. Michael and Raphael laughed at this before turning to their brother, who was still a distance away from the child. "Don't you want to see the child, Uriel?" asked Raphael encouragingly. Uriel didn't reply, but instead slowly walked towards the child. The youngling had ceased in its laughter and stared at Uriel with a blank expression. The black void which served as the seraph's face did not allow the child to completely see his expression. Uriel soon arrived right beside his brother, Raphael, and stared at Gabriel's chest where the child was resting. "Make sure not to do that too often, or we risk the child falling," spoke Uriel after a few moments of silence. Gabriel was clueless as to what her brother had meant, but her brothers knew exactly what Uriel was talking about and had laughed about it. After the laughter eventually died down, they noticed the child was still staring at Uriel with a blank expression, the child humming actively and reaching out towards Uriel's hood. Soon after witnessing this, Gabriel had figured out what the child was trying to do. "He hasn't reacted to you because he hasn't seen your face." "You're right, that must be it," agreed Raphael before smacking Uriel's back. "Show him your face. After all, if he is to be the successor of God, then he must know what all of his great seraphs look like," encouraged Raphael. Uriel stared at his brother with a shocked expression before eventually sighing and looking back at the youngling. "Are we sure this boy is to be our savior?" questioned Uriel, staring at the child intensely, the youngling not reacting at all to the dark void staring him down. Michael smiled and nodded as he went beside Uriel. Father told me that we would find the one who would lead us to our future within these chambers. And this boy has such a powerful holy aura that it already nearly matches ours. Replied Michael. Uriel glanced at his brother before groaning as his hand slowly reached up to his hood. Michael and Raphael stepped back as their brother slowly pulled down his hood. The darkness slowly faded away as the hood was pulled down. And soon enough, the true face of Uriel the Great Seraph would be revealed to the future leader of the angels. His face was that of a handsome man with a few small scars surrounding his facial features. His right eye was blinded as a scar could be seen over it. Uriel also had bright orange eyes and blonde spiky hair slanted backwards. The child stared at the naked face of Uriel and clapped his hands before laughing. Gabriel and Michael smiled at the child's positivity and acceptance of Uriel, while Raphael was chuckling softly right behind his brother. Uriel stared at the child laughing at him in surprise, but soon enough, a small smile appeared on his face. Michael laughed and grabbed his brother's shoulder approvingly. "I think he likes you," remarked Michael. Uriel chuckled softly at that. Maybe so, mused Uriel as he stared at the child in front of him. "Let us show him to the others," suggested Gabriel excitedly as she started to walk past her brothers, but a large armored hand stopped her from going too far. She turned behind her in confusion as Uriel was holding onto her shoulder. "Sister, we must not be too hasty here," said Uriel, Raphael nodding in agreement beside him. Gabriel arched an eyebrow and turned her around to face her brothers. "What do you mean, Uriel?" asked Gabriel confused. Uriel let go of her shoulder and pulled his hood back up, the void returning to block others from seeing his expressions. "We don't know if there are any potential future fallen angels within our current ranks or spies," said Michael, stepping forward. "He's right, sister. We should keep him a secret for a while, at least until he is powerful enough to defend himself," agreed Raphael, crossing his arms. Gabriel pouted at her brother's words, the child within her arms mimicking her expressions and pouting as well. "Very well," surrendered Gabriel, handing the child over to Michael, who carefully extracted the child from his sister. "Don't worry, sister. Soon enough our faction will meet their future leader," reassured Michael, Gabriel smiling in satisfaction at his words. "Then let's hurry up and raise him already," said Gabriel humorously. Her brothers laughed at her words and soon walked out of the chambers. As the seraphs exited the chambers and assigned Uriel with hiding the child for now, the doors to the chambers suddenly closed and a new barrier had formed. "What happened to it?" asked Gabriel confused as she turned to her brothers. Michael held his chin in deep thought while Raphael approached the barrier, which didn't turn out too well as when he touched the barrier, he was sent crashing into the walls. "It seems to be reacting violently to whatever disturbs the barrier. But from what I can see, it seems to be constructing something within," mused Michael before turning around and helping his brother up. "Raphael, help Uriel find a place for the young child," Michael told his brother before leaving the vicinity with his sister. Raphael scratched his head and sighed as he nodded and went to find Uriel. Gabriel and Michael had soon reunited with their fellow seraphs and had discussed the importance of keeping their father's death a secret. However, such an important piece of information could not be kept hidden for long. Eventually, the death of God would be known to the Grigori, the leaders of the fallen angel faction, and a few ultimate-class devils who seemed to now be having a civil war for the rights to become Mao. The seraphs had hoped that the leaders of the other opposing factions would see how the death of God would hurt the human race if it were to be revealed and the world in general, so they trusted them with at least that much. A few years would pass, and eventually the biblical factions would calm down a bit. Heaven was calm now, and Michael was elected as the temporary leader of heaven. Although he wasn't his father, he was doing a fine job at handling the faith of those around the world. Azazel, the governor-general of the fallen angels, was doing fine with his faction himself. Fallen angels were passive for the moment, although one of the Grigori members was quite disappointed with the fact that the war was now over. And finally, devils. They were in the most trouble right now, after new leaders were elected, and the original descendants of the original Mao were denied their places as Maos. The angry descendants created the old Mao faction, which would go to war against the new leaders. But those weren't within the concerns of Michael right now. He would leave the other two factions with themselves for the next few years. His greatest concern was the child they had found at the sacred chambers around 3 years ago. The child had been named Archon. And surprisingly, it was Uriel who had come up with the name. They had all agreed on the name of Archon as they felt that it had a powerful heavenly sound to it. Archon was still a bit young, but Gabriel was already teaching him how to speak and also some basic lessons taught to kids in human kindergarten. Raphael assisted in strengthening the boy's holy aura, but he wouldn't be able to extend his own training any further until Archon aged more. Uriel's training was definitely going to be utilized only when Archon was powerful enough to sustain his own aura. The seraphs didn't want the angel to kill the boy after all. Although Uriel insisted that he would be careful, they weren't convinced when he declared the dragon slayer, Ascalon, as his supposed training sword. Michael's training would consist of light weaponry and leadership, but he still needed to wait a few years for his training to be put into actual use. So he had worked on his duties in the meantime. But he was surely excited to finally train Archon, the future leader of the Angels. Archon was now 10 years old and was currently taking on Uriel's training regiment. Archon had grown a lot during the past 7 years, his body had become leaner and more fit, so much that it would be easy to mistake him for a well-trained 15-year-old in his current state. Uriel's training consisted of lifting, boxing, and a bunch of other workout activities that normal humans do as well, except it was tuned up to an intense level with Archon. Instead of a punching bag, Archon would be punching entire columns. And lifting massive boulders instead of weights. Of course Archon's swordsmanship had been trained by Uriel as well. Michael urged him to focus on Archon's martial arts and weapon training, but Uriel wanted Archon's body to get stronger before any of that. Uriel watched as Archon continuously pounded a magically reinforced column. The column was slowly getting decimated with every punch Archon threw. But Uriel's thoughts weren't focused on his students' training, but instead on the abnormality of Archon's holy nature. Archon was no doubt an angel, but his wings were incredibly different from the others. His wings were not covered in pure white feathers, instead his wings were entirely made up of fiery energy. When Raphael had attempted to touch Archon's strange wings, a burst of holy energy released from Archon, sending all 4 of the great seraphs flying backwards. After that incident, all of them decided to leave Archon's wings alone. But this abnormality also gave Archon a certain trait, which is immunity to sin. Archon was made to be perfectly pure and immune to all types of sin, and while some of Archon's actions could be considered sins, his natural trait prevented him from actually falling from grace. Archon could wipe out an entire village of innocent people, and he would still be technically sinless and pure. God simply made him this way, and the 4 great seraphs had eventually accepted that fact over time. Uriel was driven away from his thoughts as wings made of pure energy flapped, and Archon was now flying towards him. The seraph slowly descended from the sky to speak with his pupil. "I think I'm finished for today, Uriel," Archon told his teacher, panting tiredly. Uriel nodded and opened a portal back to heaven. "Go rest up in your room and wait for Michael," said Uriel. Archon nodded and entered the portal. Archon had proceeded to return to his room, as ordered by Uriel. Once he had gotten to his room, which was the former location of the sacred chambers, he had taken a nice quick bath to refresh himself and prepare for Michael's lessons. After a few minutes of waiting, Archon could feel someone pass through the barrier surrounding his room, which only the seraphs could pass through. 10 years ago, after the 4 great seraphs exited the sacred chambers, the door had sealed itself and began constructing what turned out to be Archon's room. God had truly prepared everything for his supposed successor, and the seraphs had praised him for it. He had saved them the effort of finding Archon his own room, but they had all agreed to keep him out of Gabriel's room, even before they had found out about the room their father had built, for certain reasons. Archon turned to his room's door as he heard the sound of knocking. Archon allowed them passage and the door had opened. Michael was the one to enter, and he seemed to be carrying a few books under his left arm. "Archon, are you ready for today's training?" asked Michael as he set down the books on Archon's desk. Archon nodded excitedly as he leaped from his excessively large bed and sat down right beside Michael. "Alright, so for today we will be practicing the creation of light weapons again," informed Michael, creating a light spear of high caliber. Archon was surprised as this was the first time Michael had shown him a light spear with this much power. "Your training with Uriel and Raphael should allow you to make light spears with this amount of power. You have learned from their training sessions, right?" inquired Michael, to which Archon nodded and opened his palm. He focused his energy onto his palm, and his aura flickered for a moment before a light spear came to life within Archon's palm. Michael inspected the light spear for a moment, but soon shook his head in disapproval. "Archon, you need to concentrate your energy more. Imagine a spear and focus your energy on creating it," said Michael, watching as Archon closed his eyes and concentrated his energy as he was told to. Archon began sweating slightly as he pictured a spear of pure fiction, made in his creative mind. He imagined a spear of pure shining gold, a spear which could wipe out entire armies, and a spear which could fire holy flames. "Focus my energy and then..." Boom. Archon's eyes shot wide open as he focused his energy and created a light spear, or so he thought he had created a light spear. Archon raised his head and looked at Michael, whose eyes were wide open in shock. The successor of God noticed Michael staring at what Archon believed was a light spear in his hand. However, when Archon looked down and saw what he was holding, his eyes soon widened in shock as well. He was indeed holding a spear, and it certainly emitted a holy aura, a powerful one even. But what surprised Archon, and probably shocked Michael as well, was that it wasn't any ordinary light spear. It was an actual spear made out of pure gold, and it also took solid form, not energy like the light spears. "How?" asked Michael in awe. Archon gulped and inspected the spear. He couldn't believe that he had somehow created a spear made within his own mind. In order to find out if it was the true spear, Archon stood up and pointed the spear at his large bed. In his dreams this spear which he now held could fire holy flames and decimate entire armies. If the spear he held could do that as well, then it was the real deal. He mimicked his actions in his dreams, first slowly raising the spear with his right hand. And then slightly pulling back before lunging the spear forward with a tightened grip. And much to Archon's and Michael's shock, the spear actually fired holy flames. Archon's bed was decimated. And had it not been for the powerful barrier protecting the room, everything else within might have been destroyed as well. Archon quickly pulled the spear back, and the spear ceased fire. Michael was at a loss for words after seeing Archon's spear. He slowly regained his composure eventually, and was quick to call the other great Ceres into the room. "Archon, do you know what you have just done?" asked Michael. A small amount of surprise was still present in his voice. Archon turned around and nervously looked at Michael, a nervous smile present on his face. "I created a light spear," replied Archon, not convinced with his own answer. Michael shook his head and approached Archon, grabbing both of his shoulders with his hands. Michael looked Archon straight in the eyes, which caused the young angel to gulp nervously. "Not just any light spear, Archon, you made a holy spear, one which takes physical form," corrected Michael before smiling proudly. Michael let go of Archon's shoulders and stepped backwards, crossing his arms as he inspected the spear. "It seems to have a very powerful holy signature, and from what you just did with it, I dare say it could rival Excalibur," remarked Michael, surprising Archon at the estimation of his spear's strength. The door to the room opened and the three other great Ceres rushed in. Uriel wielded Ascalon and prepared for a battle, Raphael's aura was flaring, and Gabriel had prepared some herbs to heal Archon in the unlikely event that he was injured. But when they saw that Archon was fine, they calmed down and approached Michael. Archon stepped back a bit and tried to hide his spear, but it was so long that it looked comical when Archon whistled and hid the spear behind him. "What happened here?" asked Uriel, pointing at the remains of Archon's bed, which surprisingly seemed to be rebuilding itself. "God's handiwork," the five of them thought as they watched the bed piece itself back together, parts of the bed which had been disintegrated, seemingly popping out of thin air. "Well, as you can see, Archon has just done the impossible," replied Michael, referring to Archon's spear, which the young angel was now holding to his side, after realizing how pointless his attempts to hide it were. "I don't understand," muttered Gabriel, confused as she looked at Archon's spear, which certainly held a powerful aura, but she thought that her brother simply lent Archon a holy spear. He created that spear out of his own imagination. His attempt at creating a high-level light spear resulted in this ultimate-class weapon, informed Michael, Gabriel and Raphael gasping in surprise, while Uriel simply stared at the spear in interest. "Is it true, Archon?" asked Raphael with a newfound sparkle in his eyes as he inspected the spear. Archon hesitantly nodded and raised the spear for them to see. Gabriel and Raphael took a closer look, while Uriel tugged Michael's sides. "What is it, brother?" asked Michael quietly. Uriel gestured for them to move back a bit from the others. The two siblings went over to the door and stood just right next to it. "Archon's spear, I sense great power from it. Do you think he should be wielding it at this age?" asked Uriel, worried for his pupil. Michael smiled and nodded before looking towards the others. He spotted Raphael inspecting the spear closely, while Gabriel was interrogating Archon. "He created the spear from his own imagination. He also appears to know how to use it from what I've seen. I'm confident in his ability to control this newfound power. And I believe we should also focus on his training with you now. I only need to teach him how to make balanced light spears. So you finally realize that my training is the best for him," huffed Uriel proudly. Michael laughed as Uriel said this. "Well, I certainly can't deny that. We should probably speak to Gabriel about his education as well. I'm thinking we could enroll him somewhere in the human world," said Michael, Uriel scoffing as he heard this. "That's quite foolish. I don't understand why Archon would require education from humans when we have many capable angels here in heaven." Michael thought about it for a second, but eventually gave up on the idea and returned to the others, Uriel trailing him from behind. When they returned they could see Raphael had taken the spear and had started testing it out, while Gabriel was still chatting with Archon. "Oh, brother. Archon and I were just speaking about the name of the spear," called out Gabriel as she noticed her brother's return from their chat. Michael nodded and looked at Archon with a smile. "And have you decided on it?" asked Michael curiously. Archon nodded and raised his hand, the spear in Raphael's hands fading into golden particles and reappearing in Archon's hands. "Solarian. Good, keep it steady," instructed Uriel, his arms crossed as he watched Archon attempt to create multiple weapons at once. While Solarian was still Archon's greatest weapon, that didn't mean that he couldn't try other weapons as well. 5 years had passed since the discovery of Archon's ability to create any weapon using the combination of his holy aura and imagination. Uriel was left in charge of training Archon's special abilities and his physical state. Michael's lessons had finished a few years ago, and so had Raphael's, leaving only Uriel's training left to complete. Archon has been doing a fine job with Uriel's training regiment and has completely mastered most of the necessary talents required to rule over heaven. Uriel watched as Archon created multiple swords and fired them at the endless abyss of the pure white training room. The training room was like a void, endless, perfect for training the future leader of the angel faction. How was that?" asked Archon, falling on his knees panting slightly. Uriel gave a nod of satisfaction and offered Archon his hand, which the young man gladly took. Uriel pulled him up and headed towards the exit of the training room. "Our training sessions will come to a stop in a year or two. After that, you will finally be introduced to the rest of the supernatural world," informed Uriel with a serious tone. Archon nodded and followed his teacher. Archon wiped some sweat off his forehead as he caught up to his teacher. The two soon exited the training room and proceeded to Archon's room. The former location of the sacred chambers was located in the 7th floor of heaven, the same floor where the 4 great seraphs resided. As the duo entered the room, Archon dematerialized his armor, which was forged by Hephaestus. Gabriel and Raphael had apparently requested that the god of blacksmiths forge the best armor he could make with the holy metal supply of the church. This resulted in the Greek pantheon demanding that the angel faction owed them a debt that would be paid when they brought it up again, to which Gabriel reluctantly agreed to. To this day, Archon still can't figure out why they had done what they did. Uriel leaned on the door as he watched Archon undress himself. He had to admit, he was impressed by how much his pupil had grown over the years. Archon's white blonde hair had grown a bit and had become a bit more spiky. His eyes were the same gold color, his body was more defined, and his muscles were toned. Archon also had a six-pack to boast about and a sharp handsome face trademarked with his signature grin. Archon's height had also grown a bit, he was now standing at around 6'5", just barely smaller than Uriel and Michael, who stood at 6'9" and 7'1". After undressing himself, he was left in nothing but his trousers. He looked at Uriel expectantly, signaling that he wanted the hooded angel to give him some privacy. Uriel huffed and left the room, giving Archon time to take a bath. The young man sighed as Uriel had closed the door to his room, and he soon proceeded to the bathroom. He decided that he needed a quick bath after today's training. As the abnormal angel was taking a bath, however, there were 2 low-class angels not too far from his room. They were quite the curious bunch. One of the angels had black hair and blue eyes, while the other had blonde hair styled into twintails and a gothic Lolita outfit. "Rainer, we really shouldn't be here," urged by the blonde angel with twintails. The other angel, her name revealed as Rainer, simply ignored her companion and quietly walked over to the sacred chambers. The blonde-haired twintail hesitantly followed her senior. Rainer had suggested that they investigate the mysteries behind the sacred chambers. Most of the low-level angels had been gossiping that there was some top-secret project behind the closed room. "Imagine how much we'll be praised if we actually find out what Michael, Sama and the other seraphs have been hiding," said Rainer with an excited expression covering her face as she examined the barrier protecting the sacred chambers. "But if we get caught, then we'll be kicked out of heaven for sure," exclaimed the blonde-haired twintail. Rainer scoffed and looked at her companion with a serious expression. "Middled, at best we'll be confined to the 2nd floor for a few days. I doubt they'll actually kick us out of heaven for such a small thing," said Rainer, turning back to the barrier and coming up with a conclusion. "From what Selena Sama has taught us about barriers, this one is specifically set so that only seraphs can enter, judging by the aura this barrier is emitting," concluded Rainer, the one called Middled humming in interest. "Then I guess we won't be able to enter. Come on, let's get out of here," suggested Middled, turning around getting ready to leave the floor. Rainer stopped her by pulling her back and suddenly raising her aura. What are you doing?" asked Middled in confusion as she felt Rainer connect her aura with hers. "Selena Sama taught me how to bind our auras together. It strengthens both of our auras by making them one," replied Rainer, pulling both of their hands into the barrier. Middlet and Rainer were shocked when both of their hands managed to get inside of the barrier. Their wings flickered slightly, but they were too shocked to notice it. 2 small portals appeared for a very short time beneath the 2, but they didn't notice that either. Rainer was amazed that both her aura and Middlet's combined could actually fool the barrier into thinking they were seraphs. This caused some unnecessary arrogance to build up within her. The black-haired angel grinned as she leaped into the barrier, pulling Middlet along with her. The 2 angels smiled in success and celebrated for a short time before turning their attention to the door that was now within their reach. Rainer reached towards the door with her hand, but suddenly she felt like she couldn't move. Middlet tried to move as well, but soon found out that she was rendered immobile as well. Middlet started to panic and thrashed her body around in an attempt to free herself from whatever held her. Rainer tried as well but gave up after realizing that whatever was holding them wasn't going to let go anytime soon. The blonde-haired twintail stopped thrashing around eventually and looked up at her senior for some assistance, but her eyes widened in shock as she laid her eyes upon Rainer. Rainer arched an eyebrow at Middlet's wide-eyed expression towards her. She was going to ask what her problem was until the blackening of Middlet's wings shut her up completely. She now realized why Middlet was so shocked upon seeing her. Raynor, your eyes, your wings," mumbled out Middleton, complete and utter shock. Raynor had a horrified expression on her face as she now saw her black angel wings. "We fell," muttered Raynor in despair. "How could this happen?" she thought in desperation. Middleton started tearing up, her wet tears dropping down on the white floor. Raynor was on the verge of breaking down as well, but she tried to stay strong for her junior angel. Two portals suddenly opened up beneath the two of them, the duo sinking into the portals slowly. Middle cried out loud, begging for God to forgive her for her insubordination. While Raynor turned to the door that ultimately caused them to fall from grace. Raynor glared at the door in hatred as she kept sinking into the portal. She would soon fall from the sky with her companion, Middled. "Whatever or whoever is within that door, I damn you to hell," screamed Raynor in her mind, tears beginning to flow out of her eyes. And thus the duo fell from heaven forever and became fallen angels. The door that the duo desperately tried to explore suddenly burst open, Archon managing to catch the two portals closing before completely disappearing. Archon was shocked to say the least. He had felt two angels just fall right out of his doorstep. But he had other questions in mind. How did the two get past the barrier, and why did they even try? These were just some of the questions filling up Archon's confused mind right now. He soon heard multiple footsteps headed right towards him. Archon narrowed his eyes and found out that Metatron, Sandalphon and Michael were coming. Archon materialized his full armor excluding the helmet to appear professional in front of the Seraphs. The two Seraphs and Archangel had arrived just outside of Archon's room, the golden armored angel walking out of the barrier protecting his room with his spear Solarian in hand. "Archon, what has transpired here?" asked Michael, a concerned voice coming out of his mouth as he uttered those words. Archon glanced behind him for a moment before shrugging in a clueless manner. "All I know is that two angels fell from grace right there, and from what I could tell they were low class," replied Archon, Metatron walking past him and inspecting the barrier for any faults. "Is the barrier malfunctioning?" asked Sandalphon, crossing his arms awaiting an answer. Metatron hummed and scanned the barrier, but was surprised when he found that it was completely fine. There were no signs of malfunction. Whoever entered the barrier had guised themselves as Seraphs, replied Metatron, turning around and walking back to his brothers. Michael was surprised when he heard this. "What? That's preposterous," exclaimed Sandalphon, slightly irritated at the suggestion that one of their angels would attempt to guide themselves as them. "It's the only explanation," said Metatron with a stern voice. "Archon, please tell us exactly what you felt happened here," requesting Michael. Archon nodded and turned to his room. "I was dressing up and preparing myself for a few thousand push-ups until I felt someone bind their auras together with another angel," said Archon, crossing his arms. "And then I felt them enter the barrier. After that I rushed to investigate, but I only managed to catch two portals closing," continued Archon, Sandalphon holding his chin in deep thought as he took in Archon's story. "Two portals, it must have been the system ejecting them from heaven," concluded Metatron, Michael nodding in agreement. "The process of ejecting recently corrupted angels should have taken around 2 minutes at the most. May I ask what took you so long to reach for the door?" asked Michael, arching an eyebrow. Archon laughed awkwardly, scratching his head in embarrassment. "Well, you see, when I prepare for a few thousand push-ups, I always create multiple metal slabs and stack them on top of me to intensify the exercise," replied Archon, Michael slamming his face into his palm. "We'll deal with this matter, no need to work yourself up over this," said Michael. Archon nodded and returned to his room. Metatron and Sandalphon were discussing the possible methods for low-class angels to bypass the barrier, but soon followed Michael back to their meeting room. Michael had called out to all the Seraphs and gathered them at their meeting room, where a massive round table lay in the middle of the room. Michael sat down right between Uriel and Gabriel, while Raphael was sitting on Gabriel's right. Metatron and Sandalphon were on Uriel's left, Rigel and Serial on Metatron's left, and Remiel and Raziel in between Serial and Raphael. Thus, all of the Seraphs had been gathered in the meeting room. "Michael, what was so important that you had to gather us all on such short notice?" asked Serial, curiosity tainting his tone. The other Seraphs turned their attention to Michael, all of them just as curious as Serial. Michael looked at Metatron and nodded his head. Metatron returned the nod and stood up from his seat, gaining the attention of everyone on the round table. "Two angels fell approximately half an hour ago," informed Metatron, a few of the Seraphs mumbling in confusion. "Is that what is called this emergency meeting?" asked Remiel impatiently. "No, it was the location of the incident that garners our attention," replied Sandalphon, his arms crossed as he leaned on his seat. "The location?" repeated Gabriel in confusion. "Yes, the incident took place not 5 feet from Archon's doorstep," said Metatron, a majority of the Seraphs donning shocked expressions. "The barrier was bypassed," exclaimed Remiel in shock. "Indeed, I felt two angels enter the barrier, so I rushed there immediately with Metatron and Sandalphon. When we arrived we found Archon in full armor standing just outside his room," said Michael. Is Archon hurt? Exclaimed Gabriel. Michael was slightly surprised at his sister's outburst. And no, he is fine, sister. He was the one who informed us of the two angels falling. Reassured Michael, Gabriel sighing in relief and leaning back on her seat. He also told us that he felt the binding of two auras before the incident occurred. This leads us to believe that the angels who fell were most likely pupils of high-class angel, Selena Arasanya. Said Metatron, gaining the attention of the seraphs. Selena, you mean the one the low classes call Monarch? Asked Raziel. Metatron nodded in confirmation. Someone seriously needs to ban her from the first floor. Groaned Rigel, eliciting some chuckles from some of his brothers. Selena specializes in aura binding and is known for her motherly love towards the low classes. I had heard from one of my troops that she had begun taking a few low-class angels as her pupils. Said Michael, gaining understanding nods from the others. So this aura binding technique allows a pair of angels to mimic the aura of a seraph for a few minutes? Inquired Raphael, receiving a nod from Michael. Apparently so, we will have Selena seize all her lessons to prevent any more incidents like this in the future. Said Michael, getting nods of approval from the rest. But this brings us to another topic. Muttered Michael, holding his chin. Gabriel tilted her head in curiosity, while the others simply awaited the reveal of the next topic. Should we reveal Archon to the supernatural world now? Asked Michael, a serious shine in his eyes. The other seraphs' jaws hung wide open in shock. They certainly didn't expect this question for a few more years. And my training with him isn't finished. Replied Uriel, speaking for the first time since arriving in this room. Gabriel instantly agreed with Uriel, while the others were still thinking about their answer. In my opinion, Archon is already powerful enough. With his spear and armor, he can pretty much beat just about anyone in this room. Voiced out Raphael, getting a glare from Gabriel that he'd never expected. I agree, I believe we should reveal him already. Agreed Remiel, Michael nodding in acceptance to his answer. He glanced around the table, waiting for the answers of his brothers. I disagree. In his current state he would lose to Surziches in his true form. Said Sandalphon, Metatron nodding his head in agreement. What makes you so confident that Surzich's true form can even beat Archon? Asked Remiel baffled. Haven't you heard? His true form places him in the top 10 strongest. Replied Sandalphon, Remiel scoffing and crossing his arms. Have you seen Solarian? That spear can wipe out an entire country in seconds. Argued Remiel, Sandalphon clenching his fist in annoyance. Even so we can't just assume Archon can beat anyone that stands in his way. Said Metatron, Remiel scoffed and simply leaned back on his chair. Sandalphon sighed and leaned back on his chair as well. In any case, I believe that he is prepared to rule heaven. Spoke Raziel, Rigel nodding in agreement. Gabriel frowned as her brothers were leaning towards revealing Archon early. I also think that he should be revealed now. Said Sariel, counting as the final vote. Michael sighed as the votes were in favor of revealing Archon. He was about to stand up until he saw Uriel stand up first. Unacceptable, I already said his training isn't finished. Said Uriel, Remiel scowling and standing up. The votes are in our favor. It's 5 against 4. Arguing to Remiel, Uriel huffed and turned away from him, angering the seraph. All you talk about is training Archon, is that seriously all you can talk about? Inquired Remiel with a slight bit of malice. Do you have something to say, Remiel? Asked Uriel threateningly. Remiel scoffed in response. I don't care about your votes, he will not be revealed until his training is complete. Declared Uriel, Sariel frowning at his brother's defiance. Brother, this is preposterous, please stop this at once. Pleaded Sariel, but was shot down when a dark void glared at him. I'm sorry, Uriel, but we must follow our own rules. Said Michael, Uriel turning to his brother in disbelief. Sacrilege. You would give Archon a burden he is not prepared to carry, exclaimed Uriel, Michael frowning at those words. Arguments began to fill the room, and it wouldn't be long before a fight would ensue. But before it could go that far, a bright light shined in between the round table, gathering the attention of everyone in the room. The bright light soon dissipated and revealed Archon in his full armor, Solarian resting within his right hand. Some of the seraphs gulped as they felt a threatening aura emitting from their future leader. Don't think for a moment that you can decide my fate with measly votes. Exclaimed Archon, his voice sounding more supreme and commanding, a voice favored by valor. Hey Archon, how did you know about our discussion? Asked Sariel, curiosity and intimidation filling his voice. I created the spear of the shining heaven, do you think I cannot eavesdrop on a meeting? Inquired Archon, Sariel gulping and leaning back on his chair. The law set by our father strictly forbids us from playing with others' lives, yet you have done so, brazenly. Declared Archon, the seraphs lowered their heads in shame. Archon looked around the room, seeing the contemplating expressions of his fellow angels. He smiled underneath his helmet which completely rejected all side of his expressions, similarly to Uriel's hood. He raised his spear and pierced the middle of the round table with it, shaking the entire room and surprising the seraphs. Archon held his breath as he slowly let go of the spear which he impaled the table with. Am I not the successor of God? Do I not have the right to decide my own fate? Inquired Archon, receiving no negative response from the seraphs. Michael sat on seat and smiled proudly at Archon. From this day forth I will decide my own fate, but you needn't worry, I will rule heaven as my father envisioned. Declared Archon, the seraph smiling and accepting Archon's declaration. Pardon me, my lord. But when will you decide to reveal yourself to the others? Asked Rigel. Archon turned to him and looked down at the table for a moment. I cannot say for sure, but when I do take up the throne, I will be ready. Replied Archon, Rigel giving a nod in acceptance to his answer. Then shall we call this meeting over? Asked Raphael. Michael nodded in confirmation. I believe our future leader has said all that he has needed to say. Replied Michael, looking at Archon to search for any disagreement. He smiled when Archon simply gave him a nod. Dismissed. Declared Michael. The seraphs soon left the room one by one. The only ones left were the 4 great seraphs and Archon. Once the final seraph left the room, leaving the 5 of them alone, Gabriel sprung herself towards Archon. You did amazingly, Archon. Complimented Gabriel, hugging Archon tightly. Archon gasped for air as his armor dematerialized and he was caught in a trap by Gabriel's beach balls. Gabriel crossed his arms and leaned on the wall, watching the event in amusement. Raphael laughed and went right beside Michael, who was also watching the scene quite amused himself. His eyes soon lingered to the spear still stuck in the middle of the table. A tired smile made its way onto his face as he leaned back on his seat. Archon's training will be complete soon, so that only leaves school. Thanks for watching this video. Part 1 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.